Before we jump into directory services, let's talk about the underlying protocol that's used in directory services called ldap, or Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. ldap is used to access information in directory services like over a network. Two of the most popular directory services that use ldap are Active Directory and Open ldap, which we'll talk about more in upcoming lessons. There are lots of different operations you can use in ldap. You can add a new entry in the directory server database, like creating a new user object called Christy. You can delete an entry in the directory server database, you can modify entries, and much more. When we say entry, we're referring to the ldap entry format or ldap notation for records in the directory service. An ldap entry is just a collection of information that's used to describe something. Take a look at this example. Don't worry too much about what this says. The format of ldap entries basically has a unique entry name denoted by DN or distinguished name, then attributes and values associated with that entry. So CN is the common name of the object. In this case, since it's a person, we use Devon Sridharan as the name. OU is the organizational unit, such as a group, and in this case, sysadmin is used. DC is domain component, so example.com is split into example, then com. Again, it's not necessary to remember these attributes. You can reference them in the next reading. The takeaway here is that ldap notation is used for entries in directory services to describe attributes using values. If you were around when phone books were used, you might remember that these big old books contained the names, addresses, and phone numbers of people in your neighborhood or community who wanted their information to be publicly listed. This is way different from the phone book or contact list you have in your mobile phone. The people who are in your contacts directory gave you their phone numbers for your use only. When using ldap, there are different authentication levels that can be used to restrict access to certain directories, similar to those big public phone directories or those private mobile phone directories. Maybe you have a directory that you want to make public so anyone can read the entries in the directory, or maybe you just want to keep that data private to only those who need it. We'll discuss how ldap does this authentication and what methods it uses. We talked about the different operations you can do with ldap, like add, remove, or modify entries in a directory. Another operation that you can perform is the bind operation, which authenticates clients to the directory server. Let's say you want to log into a website that uses a directory service. You enter your account login information and password. Your information is then sent back to the website. It will use ldap to check if that user account is a user directory and that the password is valid. If it's valid, then you'll be granted access into that account. You want your data to be protected and encrypted when it's completing this process. There are three common ways to authenticate. The first is anonymous, then simple, and the last is SASL, or Simple Authentication and Security Layer. When using anonymous binding, you aren't actually authenticating at all. Depending on how it's configured, anyone could potentially access that directory, just like our public phone book example. When you use simple authentication, you just need the directory entry name and password. This is usually sent in plain text, meaning it's not secure at all. Another authentication method that's commonly used is SASL authentication. This method can employ the help of security protocols like TLS, which you've already learned about, and Kerberos, which we'll discuss in a minute. SASL authentication requires the client and the directory server to authenticate using some method. One of the most common methods for this authentication is using Kerberos. Kerberos is a network authentication protocol that is used to authenticate user identity, secure the transfer of user credentials, and more. Kerberos by itself can be a complex topic that we'll revisit in the IT security course. If you want to learn more about Kerberos right now, you can check out the supplemental reading right after this lesson. Once the client has successfully authenticated with the ldap server or directory service, the user will be authorized to use whatever access levels they have. In the next few lessons, we're going to go dive deeper into two of the most popular directory services that use ldap, Active Directory and Open ldap.
The hardest part of my career has easily been joining Google. I joined in 2002 when the company was quite small. All men, for the most part. I was the only woman in the room most of the time. And the way I got through it was to find that thing that I wanted to be the expert at, find the thing I wanted to achieve, and to really focus on that every day. Break it down into small pieces, celebrate your milestones when you hit them. And then at the end, I had achieved something that no one else in the team could have. They had all tried, and I was the one who got it done. And so I get to sort of reflect on that occasionally and think, oh yeah, I did that. Every time a packet passes between an end user's computer and Google, it crosses a barrier that I put in place for the first time. So I got more and more interesting projects, and people began to rely on me more. And it really helped me overcome the shyness. It helped me overcome my questioning of whether or not I belong here, because I actually got to contribute in a meaningful way.